We look at your word and help us to apply these stories to our lives. We pray this in Jesus' name. Amen. Well, we're beginning in 1 Samuel chapter 22. David is on the run. And we will pick this up. Chapter 22, verse 1. I've got my old Bible here. Sorry. It should be similar. It is an ESV, but it was the first edition, so they've made a few corrections. So if we have a word or two different, that's because I'm using an older version. So 1 Samuel chapter 22. David departed from there and escaped the cave of Adullam. Remember, when we left off, David had fled the court of Saul. He popped in at Nob where the priests were. He talked to Ahimelech. He was given some bread and a weapon. And then he ended up fleeing to Gath, but that wasn't safe because they realized, hey, this is David. He's killed a bunch of our people. And so he went and hid in the caves to the west of where Saul was. Continuing, and when his brothers and all his father's house heard it, they went down there to him. Now, why do you suppose his father and his brothers went down to him? Do they think they thought that was a nicer place to live than where they were? You all need coffee. Wake up. No. They were certain Saul was going to wipe them out. And so the only chance they had of living was to go hide out with David and with the renegade soldiers that were with him. At least they had some fighting men around him. Given what Saul had done in the past and what he's going to do in the future, they read the tea leaves accurately, that their lives were worth nothing. And so they ran to stay with David in the caves. Verse 2, and everyone who was in distress and everyone who was in debt and everyone who was bitter in soul gathered to him, and he became captain over them. And there were with him about 400 men. Now he starts with 400 as we continue on down. And by next chapter, it's 600. And, David becomes captain of a band of misfits, Someone's got a debt and can't pay it, so they run away from home and they go stay with David. Someone, got on the wrong side of Saul, they ran away and stayed with David. Someone who wasn't getting along with his family, they ran along and stayed with David. And he became more or less a Robin Hood figure. As we see as going forward, he'll be attacking towns and giving to his men and others. Verse 3, and David went from there to Mizpah of Moab. He said to the king of Moab, please let my father and my mother stay with you till I know what God will do for me. And he left them with the king of Moab, and they stayed with him all the time that David was in the stronghold. Then the prophet Gad said to David, do not remain in the stronghold, depart and go into the land of Judah. So David departed and went into the forest of Hereth. So a couple things there. What do we know about David and any relationship he might have with the Moabites? This is advanced Bible trivia, by the way. David's great-grandmother, Ruth, was a Moabite, so they had some family connection there. And surely David's father and mother were more elderly at this point, and living in a cave probably not suitable for them. And so he asked the king of Moab to take care of them, and he did. Also, we see that David has a prophet. And very shortly here as we progress, we're going to see David has a prophet. David is going to have a priest who's going to bring the breastplate with him. And Saul is going to have none of that. So David is going to have the religious trappings of a king, and Saul is going to be completely without. So there's this transition going. And we also see, as we go from this point forward, David is going to be constantly seeking the Lord and asking the Lord's guidance. Should I do this? Should I do that? Whereas Saul is just going to go with his gut. He's not going to ask the Lord anything as far as what's written in the Bible here. So very huge change in leadership styles. We see David being a proper leader and seeking to do the Lord's will, and Saul being degenerating to a typical Middle Eastern tyrant, doing whatever he feels like doing, exercising raw power, and never asking the Lord what he wants him to do. Verse 6. Now Saul heard that David was discovered, the men who were with him. Saul was sitting at Gibeah under the tamarisk tree in the height with his spear in his hand, and all his servants were standing about him. And Saul said to his servants who stood about him, "Hear now, people of Benjamin. Will the son of Jesse give every one of you fields and vineyards? Will he make you all commanders of thousands and commanders of hundreds? That all of you have conspired against me. No one discloses to me when my son makes a covenant with the son of Jesse. None of you is sorry for me or discloses to me that my son has stirred up my servant against me to lie in wait as at this day." So I want to picture the scene. Saul calls out to the people of Benjamin. I mean, what that indicates is that his immediate court, his immediate advisors, the people in power in his administration, are all from his own tribe. They're all Benjaminites. And so he appeals to, what's the right word? The patronage principle. It's like, I'm from Benjamin, you're from Benjamin, you're getting all kinds of good things because of me, because we're tribe mates. David's from Judah. Are you going to get anything from him? No, he's going to come into power and it's going to be all his people and you're going to get nothing. So why are you not helping me? And Saul is aware of the close relationship between Jonathan, who is, as a reminder, the crown prince, the heir to the throne, as far as Saul is concerned, his administration is concerned. And he acknowledges that Jonathan and David have a special relationship. And why did nobody tell me this? And they all are just kind of quiet. Why? Well, I think many of them are more in tune with the Lord than is Saul. They know that David is chosen, special, and innocent. He hasn't done anything wrong. And he's popular with the people. And Saul says, "Why are you not telling me where David is? Why are you not telling me my own son is in a close relationship with him, has made a covenant with him?" And now, if we're watching the movie version, the bad guy music starts rolling. Because there's a non-Israelite who could care less about David and is perfectly happy to get Saul's favor and power and money. And he's named Doeg the Edomite. Verse 9. Then answered Doeg the Edomite, who stood by the servants of Saul, "I saw the son of Jesse coming to Nob, to Ahimelech the son of Ahitub. And he inquired of the Lord for him and gave him provisions and gave him the sword of Goliath the Philistine." Well, that's infuriating. Then the king sent to summon Ahimelech the priest, the son of Ahitub, and all his father's house, the priests who were at Nob. And all of them came to the king, and Saul said, "Hear now, son of Ahitub." And he answered, "Here I am, my lord." And Saul said to him, "Why have you conspired against me, you and the son of Jesse, and that you have given him bread and a sword, and have inquired of God for him, so that he has risen against me to lie in wait as at this day?" And Saul's super paranoid. Now he's accusing David of wanting to assassinate him and just lying in wait for an opportunity. Verse 14. Then Ahimelech answered the king, "And who among all your servants is so faithful as David, who is the king's son-in-law and captain over your bodyguard and honored in your house? Is today the first time that I've inquired of God for him? No. Let not the king impute anything to his servant or to all the house of my father, for your servant has known nothing of all this, much or little." Poor Ahimelech. I mean, David didn't say, "I'm on the run from Saul," so Ahimelech had no reason to know. In fact, Ahimelech was a little suspicious, like, "What are you doing here by yourself?" He's usually at the head of hundreds of soldiers in a company. And David said, "Oh, I'm a special mission. You got any bread?" "Well, I've got the priest's bread. If you ritually pure," it's like, "Oh yeah, I am." "Got any weapons? Because I was in such a hurry, I didn't bring a sword." "The sword of Goliath's here." "Okay." So what is Ahimelech supposed to do? This is the number one soldier in Saul's army, the king's son-in-law, married to a princess in high favor, and he's asking for help. What are you supposed to do? Well, you help him. And then Saul calls in Ahimelech and said, "David's conspiring to kill me, and he's on the run, and you helped him." It's like, I didn't know anything. What am I supposed to do? I mean, this is what I usually do for David. I didn't know anything was going on. Now, this is about the darkest episode in the reign of Saul here. Because Saul is he's just on a rampage, and he's going with his gut, and he's angry, and he's seeing enemies everywhere. And he is, has absolutely no fear of God at this point in his career. Verse 16, and the king said, "You shall surely die, Ahimelech, you and all your father's house." This is why David and his family got out of town. He's going to kill the high priest and all the priests. And the king said to the guard who stood about him, "Turn and kill the priests of the Lord, because their hand also is with David." And they knew that he fled and did not disclose it to me. But the servants of the king would not put out their hand, strike the priests of the Lord. They just stood still. It's like, the king's ordered me to kill the priests. I spent my entire life being taught that the priests were special. Nothing. Then the king said to Doeg, "You turn and strike the priests." And Doeg the Edomite turned and struck down the priests, and he killed on that day 85 persons who wore the linen ephod. 85 priests. And Nob, the city of the priests, he put to the sword, both man and woman, child and infant, ox, donkey, and sheep he put to the sword. I mean, that's the kind of thing like in the conquest of the Holy Land. I mean, that was referred to as like the ban. There were special cases where God said, you just kill everything, absolutely everything, men, women, children, animals, leave nothing alive. I mean, it was like a holy war type of thing. And so Saul not only kills the priests, which is a horrible, horrible offense, he puts their whole city to death in a holy war style thing. Absolutely brutal. I mean, do you think at this point anybody alive in Israel is going to trust Saul with anything? I mean, the entire nation is going to be operating in fear only, and either getting out of town. Maybe why David's numbers swelled by another couple hundred is like they're either getting out of town or Saul's going crazy. I mean, maybe some other soldiers in Saul's close circle took off to hang out with David. It's like, I'm next. I mean, I don't trust him with anything. It's horrible. Verse 20. But one of the sons of Ahimelech, son of Ahitub, named Abiathar, escaped and fled after David. And Abiathar told David that Saul had killed the priests of the Lord. David said to Abiathar, "I knew on that day when Doeg the Edomite was there that he would surely tell Saul, I have occasioned the death of all the persons of your father's house. Stay with me. Do not be afraid, for he who seeks my life seeks your life. With me you shall be in safekeeping." So I'm sure David feels, somewhat guilty here because he wasn't straightforward with Ahimelech. He's not directly responsible for the deaths. But Abiathar, the only living adult priest remaining, is with David. So David now has a prophet and a priest. In my handout, the last comment on the first page there, one commentator wrote, "This period of persecution in David's life was part of his preparation for the throne." Oops, left out an E there. He was already a great soldier. Now he needed to suffer in the wilderness to learn not to trust men, but to trust the Lord. All of us need wilderness testings to bring us closer to the Lord, to make us better equipped to serve him. So I appreciate, and that was Chuck Missler, I appreciate him adding that thought to make us step back a little bit, reflect on our own life. David was in the wilderness for, I think we wrote down last week the number of years. It was at least a decade. At least a decade. Out of power, on the run, having to trust the Lord with everything, little and great. Little as in, like, where do I get my next meal? And great as in, should we, go to battle with the city or not? So in what way have any of you experienced wilderness periods in your life that you feel like it prepared you for what God had for you down the road? Whether it was unemployment or grief or maybe financial struggles. Anyone want to share anything? Well, you guys are doing better than me. You got it going good all the time.
I went through Hurricane Katrina back 20 years ago and realized that even though I had working for the power company, I had things provided for me that others didn't. I realized that things could always be worse.
Yeah.
And so really I think that changed my mindset from not a woe is me
Yeah. Yeah. So even watching other people go through wilderness period is a good perspective on life. I've quoted in sermons before the greatest psychiatrist of the 20th century, Karl Menninger, founded Menninger Clinic. He said a couple things, but that I remember. But one is one of the best advice he gives someone struggling with depression is to go find someone less fortunate than you and help them. And you will realize that you actually have it better than many, many people. Too often we're all looking at our neighbors and then we imagine things about them. They're not actually having the perfect life that we imagine they're having because we're only looking at their Facebook and their neatly manicured lawn and their new Lexus in the driveway, and we think everything is wonderful for them, but woe is me who have struggles with this and struggles with that and yada, yada, yada. But they don't really. And one of the privilege I've had of being a parish priest is you get behind the facade that we all put on, and I put one on too. We all want to look. That's why I comb my hair in the morning. I want to look sharp, look like I got it together. But as a priest, you get more involved in people's lives behind the scenes and dealing with struggles with their children and financial struggles and health struggles and realize that everybody has struggles. And what we see here in the life of David is even great struggles, even long seasons of struggle, in this case 10 years, can be a time of personal growth, a time of spiritual growth, a time we learn to rely on the Lord and not on ourselves. It's too easy when things are going well to think we're wonderful. We're wonderful and everything is easy. And just so much better than average. All our children are above average in everything, right? It was funny. I've had a couple of humbling experiences. No matter how high you are on a totem pole, eventually you climb the ladder, you're at the bottom. So one of my humbling experiences, I got to Oxford University and realized I was in the bottom half of the class. That never happened to me before. Most everybody was smarter than I was, so you eventually get there. And a few other things, but we'll move on. Anyway, so the wilderness experience, it's a time of trial, it's a time of training. We get the trial part, but I think we don't always see the positive, the training part. And as Chuck Missler said in his comment, learning to rely on the Lord. And we're going to see over and over again, David is double checking and triple checking, asking the Lord before making any significant decision. How often do we just go off the cuff and just do whatever we feel like doing, instead of asking the Lord? But this is where David learned to ask the Lord, and he did pretty well for a number of years until he got rich and powerful and everything was easy. Then he stopped asking the Lord. So that's another story. We'll get to that in the next book, but let's pick up here. Let's see. We just finished chapter 22. Let's move on to 23. Now they told David, "Behold, the Philistines are fighting against Keilah and are robbing the threshing floors." The threshing floors is like you've brought in the harvest and you're separating the wheat and the chaff, and it's, you're about to have your abundance of food. And the Philistines are waiting until harvesting. They're letting the people of Keilah do all the work. And then when they have processed the wheat and the chaff and they could just grab bushels and bushels and bushels of wheat, they come in and rob them. Verse 2, therefore David inquired of the Lord, shall I go and attack these Philistines? So probably inquiring of the Lord, they're casting Urim and Thummim because he's got a priest with an ephod. And the Lord said to David, go and attack the Philistines and save Keilah. Okay, the Lord said, do it. Verse 3, but David's men said to him, behold, we're afraid here in Judah. How much more then if we go to Keilah against the armies of the Philistines? So David inquired of the Lord by the means that was accepted of inquiring of the Lord, casting Urim and Thummim out of the priest's ephod. God said yes. He said, okay, God said yes. And they said, whoa, 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 whoa. I mean, we're fearing for our life here in Judah. Keilah was more of a border town, kind of bordering between the Israelite territory and the Philistines. We're afraid here in Judah. We're going to go over to where the Philistines are? Verse 4, then David inquired of the Lord again. Well, let's ask again. And the Lord answered him, arise, go down to Keilah, for I will give the Philistines into your hand. So, okay, that's 2 yeses. At this point, you have to obey. And that's another lesson. You may be dealing with an issue in your life and you're trying to get God's guidance and you think you're hearing him say yes. And I did a whole teaching on listening to God back in 1 Samuel chapter 3. So maybe you go to some good Christian friends. Would you pray with me on this? I'm trying to decide if I should do X. And you pray and you're kind of feeling you should do it. And they pray and they said, oh, I'm kind of feeling you should do it. You're still afraid. What do? Do you obey your fear? Or do you obey what God is telling you? Well, David did the right thing. After 2 yeses. Verse 5. And David and his men went to Keilah and fought with the Philistines and brought away their livestock and struck them with a great blow. So David saved the inhabitants of Keilah. Excuse me. He saved Keilah, got some spoil. That'll feed his men for a while. And the people of Keilah, I'm sure, are grateful to David. Yes, but is the answer to that. Verse 6, when Abiathar, the son of Ahimelech, had fled to David to Keilah, he'd come down with an ephod in his hand. Now it was told Saul that David had come to Keilah. Saul said, God has given him into my hand, for he has shut himself in by entering a town that has gates and bars. Now, Saul just made that up in his own head. He didn't inquire of the Lord saying, are you giving David into my hand? No, he did not. He just said, hey, God's given him to me. Verse 8, and Saul summoned all the people to war to go down to Keilah to besiege David and his men. David knew that Saul was plotting harm against him. He said to Abiathar the priest to bring the ephod here. And then said David, O Lord, the God of Israel, your servant has surely heard that Saul seeks to come to Keilah to destroy the city on my account. Will the men of Keilah surrender me into his hand? Will Saul come down as your servant has heard, O Lord, the God of Israel? Please tell your servant. So apparently David has a little bit of a spy network, and someone said, hey, Saul's come down here. He got a little advance wind of it. And he asked the Lord through the means that was accepted in the ephod. And the Lord said, he will come down. Okay, not the answer I wanted. Verse 12, then David said, will the men of Keilah surrender me and my men into the hand of Saul? The Lord said, they will surrender you. And David and his men, who were about 600, rose and departed from Keilah. They went wherever they could go. When Saul was told that David had escaped from Keilah, he gave up the expedition. And David remained in the strongholds in the wilderness, in the hill country of the wilderness of Ziph. Saul sought him every day, but God did not give him into his hand. So David saved the residents of Keilah, but Keilah were not going to fight Saul over it. I mean, they were not a major city. And so Saul came down with a couple thousand men. I mean, what are you going to do? He said, thank you, David, I appreciate it, but we're going to give you up because we can't fight Saul. After what happened to the city of Nob, the city of the priests, utterly destroyed. And that was just on a false rumor that the priest had helped David. You know, how much worse if the city of Keilah had, without question, helped David. So David remains on the run. Verse 15. David saw that Saul had come out to seek his life. David was in the wilderness of Ziph at Horesh. And Jonathan, Saul's son, rose and went to David at Horesh and strengthened his hand in God. He said to him, "Do not fear, if the hand of Saul my father shall not find you. You shall be king over Israel, and I shall be next to you. Saul my father also know this." And the two of them made a covenant before the Lord. David remained at Horesh, and Jonathan went home. I think I mistakenly said last week that was, Jonathan's last meeting with David. This is literally Jonathan's last meeting with David, last time he sees him. Said he made a covenant with him. I think it's probably more accurate to say he renewed a covenant with him that he had previously made. And Jonathan openly acknowledged that he knows that David is to be the next king, not Jonathan himself. And he has a vision of being number two man in the kingdom, of being by the king's side. That may be actually a technical role, like next, the person next to the king. And he envisions the two of them ruling Israel together. David's a king, and Jonathan's his right-hand man. And that's the last time he sees him. Verse 19. Then the Ziphites went up to Saul at Gibeah, saying, "Is not David hiding among us in the strongholds at Horesh, on the hill of Hachilah, which is south of Jeshimon? Now come down, O king, according to all your heart's desire to come down, and our part shall be to surrender him into the king's hand." Saul said, "May you be blessed by the Lord, for you have compassion on me. Go, make yet more sure. Know and see the place where his foot is, who has seen him there. For it is told me that he is very cunning. See therefore and take note of all the lurking places where he hides, and come back to me with sure information. Then I will go with you. And if he is in the land, I will search him out among all the thousands of Judah." And they arose and went to Ziph ahead of Saul. Now David and his men were in the wilderness of Maon, in the Arabah, to the south of Jeshimon. And Saul and his men went to seek him. And Saul was told, so he went down to the rock and lived in the wilderness of Maon. When Saul heard that, he pursued after David in the wilderness of Maon. Saul went on one side of the mountain, and David and his men on the other side of the mountain. And David was hurrying to get away from Saul, as Saul and his men were closing in on David and his men to capture them. A messenger came to Saul, saying, "Hurry and come, for the Philistines have made a raid against the land." So Saul returned from pursuing after David and went against the Philistines. Therefore that place was called the Rock of Escape. And David went up from there and lived in the strongholds of En-Gedi. There's no reason why Saul should not have captured David at that point, killed most of his men and killed David, except that God intervened. There was God probably led the Philistines to make a raid and made sure Saul heard of it. And Saul, as king, his first obligation is to protect the people against their enemies. And so he had to break off his chasing of David. And David survived not because he was so smart or so much better than everyone else, but because God protected him. God made sure Saul had more important business to be on rather than capturing David. I wrote in my Bible the phrase that I'd heard before that I kind of liked it. God is seldom early, but never late. We would love God to do what he's going to do way in advance of any problems that we're going to have. I mean, if God may heal us of an illness, but wouldn't we rather have never gotten the illness to begin with? Or there may be a last-second answer to a prayer, but we probably would have wanted that answer 4 months earlier so we wouldn't have had 4 months of distress. Anybody can relate to that? God is seldom early but never late. He takes care of us, but oftentimes, usually, not as quickly and easily as we would like. It's going back to that, we talked about that earlier, the wilderness experience of David, the time of testing and the time of training. And If God gave immediate answer to prayers, everybody would be praying, wouldn't they? I mean, even non-Christians would be praying because you know what? You pray and it gets fixed. So I think part of that is God separating the connection between prayer and answer just enough so it isn't absolutely obvious what's happened, so we can exercise faith, so that we can acknowledge that was God rather than coincidence. I think we got time to jump into chapter 24, and then we will slow down a little bit next week. As I've kind of said a few times, the story of David and Abigail, chapter 25, is one of my favorites. But there's a telling incident here where David has a chance to take Saul's life and does not. Chapter 24. When Saul returned from following the Philistines, he was told, behold, David is in the wilderness of En-gedi. So he went on his mission. The Philistines fought them and then went back to his next highest priority, which is killing David. And he was told he's in the wilderness of En-gedi. That's down by the Dead Sea, down near the area where they found the Dead Sea Scrolls. Put that in context. Then Saul took 3,000 chosen men out of all Israel and went to seek David and his men in front of the Wild Goats Rock. So 3,000, remember, we're told David had 600. So that's a 5-to-1 ratio, and these would have been, he said, describe them as chosen men, kind of like these are the best soldiers. He's got 5 for every one of David's. Verse 3, and he came to the sheepfolds by the way where there was a cave, and Saul went in to relieve himself. Now David and his men were sitting in the innermost parts of the cave. And the men of David said to him, here is the day of which the Lord said to you, behold, I will give your enemy into your hand. You shall do to him as it seemed good to you. David arose and stealthily cut off a corner of Saul's robe, and afterward David's heart struck him because he had cut off the corner of Saul's robe. Said to his men, the Lord forbid that I should do this thing to my Lord, the Lord's anointed, to put out my hand against him, seeing he is the Lord's anointed. So David persuaded his men with these words, and they did not permit them to attack Saul. Saul rose up and left the cave and went on his way. Now, if David had killed Saul here, there's a decent chance he could have stepped right into the throne, not only because his success as a military leader, his popularity, but also he had a claim to the family of Saul by being married to one of Saul's daughters. Of course, there could easily have been a succession battle. Other people would raise up Jonathan. Remember, a lot of times in these succession battles, it's the court that's vying for power. And the court will see, am I better off with David in charge or better off with Jonathan in charge? It'd be a bit of a power play. But David, excuse me, is portrayed here as very righteous in that there is a law in the laws of Moses that you don't lay a hand on the Lord's anointed. And despite the fact that Saul is trying to kill him, despite the fact that Saul's got 3,000 soldiers here trying to kill him, David will not violate the law. He is facing great temptation here, temptation to kill the man who's been chasing him for months at this point, and he won't do it. And there's a little detail here, just to get into the nitty-gritty, this does not put Saul in a good light, because the translation relieve himself is actually technically in the Hebrew going number 2. So he's sitting down to go number 2. And so Saul is being depicted in the most base position, and David says, I will not touch the Lord's anointed. Verse 8. Afterwards, David also arose and went out of the cave and called after Saul, my lord the king. Well, that's bold. So Saul's with 3,000 people chasing David, and all of a sudden David pops up and calls him. When Saul looked behind him, David bowed with his face to the earth and paid homage. He bowed face down. Totally the right attitude toward the king. And David said to Saul, "Why do you listen to the words of men who say, 'Behold, David seeks you harm'? Behold, this day your eyes have seen how the Lord gave you today into my hand in the cave, and some told me to kill you, but I spared you. I said, I will not put out my hand against my Lord, for he is the Lord's anointed. See, my father," remember he's father-in-law to David, "see, my father, see the corner of your robe in my hand, for by the fact that I cut off the corner of your robe and did not kill you, you may know and see that there is no wrong or treason in my hands. I have not sinned against you, though you hunt my life to take it. May the Lord judge between me and you. May the Lord avenge me against you, but my hand shall not be against you. As the proverb of the ancient says, out of the wicked comes wickedness, but my hand shall not be against you. After whom has the king of Israel come out? After whom do you pursue? After a dead dog? After a flea? May the Lord therefore be judge and give sentence between me and you, and see to it and plead my cause and deliver me from your hand." So David gives a humble speech. He refers to himself not simply as a dog, but as a dead dog. Not simply as a dead dog, but a flea on a dead dog. That's how low he's positioning himself. And you can only imagine the emotions of Saul. Remember, at this point, the Lord has left Saul. And so Saul is just a victim of his emotions. He's getting yanked here and there. He's not always evil, but, the devil can come in and just yank him this way. And sometimes the Lord will give him a little reprieve. And I imagine Saul immediately hears David's voice, and he's thinking, like, kill the guy. And all of a sudden he's laying down on his face, and he's giving a good speech. He's like a little bit confused. And then David holds up the piece of his garment, which he cut with a knife. And at that point, I just feel like all the rage is gone from Saul. And he's like, just like, oh my gosh, what have I been doing? I could be dead right now, and he didn't kill me. And so he has a change of heart at that point. It's going to be temporary, but at that point, all the rage is gone, and he is completely changed by this moment. Verse 16. As soon as David had finished speaking these words to Saul, Saul said, "Is this your voice, my son David?" And Saul lifted up his voice and wept. He said to David, "You are more righteous than I, for you have repaid me good, whereas I have repaid you evil. And you have declared this day how you have dealt with me, in that you did not kill me when the Lord put me into your hands. For if a man finds his enemy, will he let him go away safe? So may the Lord reward you with good for what you have done to me this day. Now behold, I know that you shall surely be king, that the kingdom of Israel shall be established in your hand. Swear to me, therefore, by the Lord, that you will not cut off my offspring after me, that you will not destroy my name out of my father's house." And David swore this to Saul, and then Saul went home. But David and his men went up to the stronghold. So Saul had a moment of clarity and a moment of thinking right, and he admitted to David publicly what he had harbored in his heart, that he knew David was going to be the next king. And at this point, he pleads, "Don't destroy my family when you're king." And David said, "Okay." I like to compare this episode where David was tempted and in the face of great temptation did the right thing with David's failure in 2 Samuel with Bathsheba. David's early career is presented as flawless. I'm sure he wasn't perfect, but, making the right decisions, doing the right things, seeking the Lord, trying to obey the Lord even when tempted to do otherwise. And then later, when he reaches middle age, he's not as sharp morally, spiritually. I think that is also a lesson for us. You can't ride on the coattails of early success and think you're always going to make good decisions and always, be a strong Christian. You have to maintain that relationship. You have to work on it. I say in sermons from time to time, I feel like Living a Christian life is like standing on one of those moving walkways at the airport, only it's moving slowly backward. And if you stand there doing nothing, after a good long while, you'll find you're in a way worse place than you thought you were or that you used to be. But if you're making steps forward, you're actually gaining ground on that slowly backward moving walkway. And I feel like the Christian life is like that. We need to be steadily moving forward. We need to be reading our Bibles. We need to be having a daily prayer time. We need to be seeking out Christian fellowship and times of worship to continue to help us with our daily struggles. Wednesday night when we were doing the Screw Tape letters, the letter that we were doing, I think it was number 8, was talking about the spiritual troughs, the low points we all go through. I probably wouldn't design it this way, but we have highs and lows, and we have times where we feel close to God and times that we don't feel close to God. And we need to continue to do the work to maintain the relationship, to stay grounded in the Lord, sometimes even when we don't feel like it, so that we can continue to have success in our relationship with God and in our lives as Christians. I told a few people, I'm turning 63 next week, and I've been in parish ministry for 31 years. And like any young man, whether you're a lawyer or a teacher or a soldier or a clergy person, when you're young, you have, let's just call it delusions of grandeur. You're going to build your kingdom. You're going to be president of the United States. You're going to be a 3-star general. You're going to be bishop or whatever on your career path gets to the top. And then hopefully, by the time you reach middle age somewhere, you get humbled a bit, and you start to focus on what we should be focused on is what is God calling me to do. Not what position my ego would like, but what position would fulfill the work God has given me to do, that would fulfill the calling God has given me to do. And David, as we'll get to in 2 Samuel, had achieved absolutely everything, and he was bored, and he was just not focusing on the Lord anymore, and he was just trying to gratify his own needs. And it is a temptation, and it is a dangerous path which we all need to work against. And that's a long way to get around to my point, was saying in recent years, my focus has turned away from building kingdoms and more towards finishing well. Did David finish well? Not really. After the thing with Bathsheba, it was rough the whole rest of the way out. He repented, and that was good, and that's what we all have to do when we screw up. But how much better it is to keep close to the Lord, to keep trying to stay rooted, to keep trying to resist temptation. Because nobody wants a good testimony. You heard that before? Good testimony. I was a drug addict, and I, lost my marriage and all my friends, and now I'm following Jesus, and it's much better. Yeah, well, that's a good testimony, but you don't want that, do you? Yeah, so anyway. Well, we blew through that pretty fast, but that's okay. I wanted to finish a little early. We have a baptism at the 10:30 service, so I need to go check in with them in a few minutes. As I like to say, I love going through this section of the Old Testament. It's kind of like a godly soap opera. Real people having real challenges, real emotions, and how do they face it, and how did God help them, and how do they look to the Lord? Anyone want to share any reflections on what we've just been over? Scott has a deep thought going over there. He's thinking. Come on, Jerry, what do you got?
Well, I think David, the story that we experienced this morning is a prime example that we often don't know the good that comes from our pain.
Yeah.
until we're past it. In the midst of it, it seems like we'll never be out. We'll never get out of it.
Yeah.
And sometimes it takes weeks, sometimes months, and sometimes years
Yeah.
for us to really experience the redemption that came from the pain that we see.
Yeah. It's a good word, and just to repeat those online that Jerry was saying, we don't appreciate when we're in the struggle, when we're in the pain, we're in the wilderness, the good that will come out of it. And I already talked about two positives. One is character building, and the other is learning to rely on the Lord. But also, our pain can be turned into a blessing for others. And I've said this before in terms of ministry. If you have been through the pain of a debilitating illness, you are better able to empathize and minister to someone else going through the same thing. Or if you've been through the pain of losing a loved one to death, or a pain through going through a divorce, or any of these things. There is the building of character, the trusting the Lord, but also an area of ministry, which you can reach out to others. In a sense, this life is one long training ground. You know, in any career, you go through training, whether you're training for a sport or training for a profession. In a lot of ways, this life is a training ground for eternity. And we talked Wednesday night in our letter in C.S. Lewis that though our bodies are mortal, our souls are eternal. And this life is a blink of an eye compared to eternity. And so, for better or worse, God is not ultimately super concerned that we have an easy life. But he's concerned with what we do through the struggles and where we end up. So.
As in my one of my pastorates, I had an elderly man. His name was Ed King. Never forget him. As he was passing away, I was at the hospital, and they called me Preach, and so he looked up at me and he said, he was a tennis player also. He was a teacher and a tennis player.
Yeah.
And he looked at me and he said, Preach. He said, just keep swinging.
Yeah.
Keep swinging at the ball. Eventually
Yeah.
you'll hit it. And I think there's a lot of truth.
Just keep swinging. Yeah. Yeah, and in the sayings of the Desert Fathers, I forgot which one said this, but he said, "Expect temptation to your final breath." And these are the holiest men of their generation who are praying and fasting and trying to be perfect and living in the wilderness, and said, expect temptation to your final breath. And I love that, because that reminded me that it's never supposed to be easy, so stop feeling sorry for yourself. And when you realize it's never supposed to be easy, it actually gets more bearable. You know, because it's too easy to go like, why am I struggling? You know, why is this hard? You know, why am I having problems at work? Why am I having problems with my children? You know, whatever it is. Well, it's supposed to be hard. It's normal. It's normal. Just keep swinging. I love it. All right, let's close in prayer. Heavenly Father, thank you for many blessings. Thank you for this time together, and ask you to continue to help us through your words of Scripture, and remind us when we most need it of these stories, and how David chose to do what was right when he was tempted to do something else, and how we grow through our sufferings and we learn to trust in you. We pray this in Jesus' name. Amen. All right. Thank you all.